Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us tonight for what I hope will be an important discussion addressing the unprecedented healthcare and economic crisis facing this country. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to chat for a little bit about what's going on in Washington, what I think should be going on in Washington, and then we're going to bring on separately and then together three of the outstanding members of the United States Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, ILHAN Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. And they will speak separately, and then we'll engage in a discussion together. And I wanted to have them on this virtual town meeting. They represent different parts of the country, and I wanted to hear from them what's going on in their communities and where they think we should go as a country. We're also very appreciative tonight that we have a grandson who is going to provide some excellent quality music as we move the program along. This is, as I think everybody knows, a moment in American and world history that nobody alive has ever experienced. We're dealing with dual crises. We're dealing with a healthcare crisis in terms of the coronavirus, which is spreading all over our country, has spread all over the world, will kill many, many millions of people throughout the world. And we are dealing with an economic meltdown of enormous significance impacting the world and impacting our own economy as well. And let me begin by saying to you that, my goal tonight is not to be partisan. I think the last thing that the American people want to be hearing is some kind of partisan attacks. Everybody is worried, everybody is concerned, and they want to know where we go from here. But I do have to say that I was really stunned to read aspects of the Republican bill that has been proposed. It's not going to go anyplace. I think the Democratic caucus will not accept it for a second. But it is hard for me to believe that in the midst of this terrible crisis, that we have a Senate Republican bill that would give the Trump administration a blank check to hand out corporate welfare to virtually any corporation in America without conditions as to how they can protect workers in this country. And that obviously is not going to happen, but that is what they're coming forward. And right now we have, again, unbelievable as it may seem, I am more than familiar with corporate greed and the power of lobbyists, but to think that at this moment, when we have doctors and nurses putting their lives on the line to protect the American people, you have corporate lobbyists who are working overtime in order to receive special benefits for their corporations. And let me just give you a few examples so you'll understand how vulgar some of what is going on is. We're hearing from the airline industry, which is admittedly hard hit. They want a $50 billion bailout, but they are not talking about how they're going to protect the workers in that industry. We're talking about, this is quite amazing, the private space industry. Remember, this is the midst of a coronavirus epidemic. The private space industry is requesting $5 billion to benefit people like Jeff Bezos and other billionaires. The candy industry, again, a crisis in which millions of people are going to get sick, many will die. The candy industry is online for a $500 million to benefit the likes of the Mars candy bar family. And, this is a family that is one of the wealthiest families in America, worked very hard to reduce taxes for the rich. They're in line. The hotel industry wants $150 billion. And by the way, one of the recipients of that bailout would be the Trump family. The National Association of Manufacturers, who in the past have shut down factories in America, moved to China, moved to Mexico, been at war with the working people in this country. They're online, man. They're there. Their lobbyists are there. They want $1.4 trillion in assistance. Obviously, that is just astounding to me, and I think the American people. Apparently, the greed of some of these people has no end. In my view, and I think the American people are united on this, we need policies now which benefit the working families of this country, that benefit low-income people, that benefit the most vulnerable. We're not here to give handouts to large corporate interests without any strings attached. Let me say a word about the healthcare crisis in terms of what we have got to do. One of the things that I find astounding is that, and it speaks volumes about the dysfunctionality and the absurdity of the current healthcare system. One might think that at a time when we are spending $11,000 for every man, woman, and child, twice as much as the people of any other country, one might think that we would be prepared for an epidemic in terms of making sure that our medical professionals, our doctors, our nurses, and other people who are in day-to-day contact with people struggling with the coronavirus, you might think that they would have the masks that they need, that they would have the gloves they need, that they would have the protective gowns they need in order to do their jobs. The truth is, as I think many of you know, they do not have that medical equipment. And right now, we are seeing in this country and around the world, medical professionals getting sick because of their exposure to the coronavirus. And this is not only a tragedy for the doctors and the nurses and the other medical profession, it is a very frightening situation for our whole country. Because if our frontline doctors and nurses go down and are unable to provide the care we desperately need at this moment, who is going to be there to protect the millions of people who are sick? So what we have got to do right now is to understand that at this moment, the President of the United States has got to fully utilize in an extremely aggressive way the Defense Production Act. And what the Defense Production Act states is that the president has a right to tell a private company, you know what, instead of manufacturing T-shirts or underwear or socks, not exactly what we need right now in the midst of this crisis, you will start production in terms of masks, in terms of gowns, in terms of gloves, in terms of the other equipment that our medical professionals need. Now, the good news is some in the private sector, some companies are already making that transformation, and I applaud them. And these companies deserve to be adequately compensated for the work that they're doing. But what we need is at a time when experts estimate that the United States alone, I'm not talking about the rest of the world, our country alone, may need a minimum of hundreds of millions of masks, because they are disposable. You don't reuse them. You should not reuse them. Of masks and gloves and gowns in order to get through this pandemic. What the President of the United States must tell various companies is, you're going to stop producing what you're producing today. We need you to produce the products that our doctors and nurses and medical personnel needs. In addition to making sure that our physicians and nurses have the protective equipment they need to protect their own lives so that they can continue protecting the American people, Trump must order the immediate production of ventilators, ICU units, test kits, and the agents needed to process those tests. We are woefully behind in all of those areas. There are apparently tests now being developed which can give results in less than an hour. And that is enormously important, because what we don't want to do is have hospital beds filled up with people who do not have the coronavirus. We want to make sure that those beds are there for the people who need them. And rapid processing of these tests is terribly important. So on an emergency basis, we've got to get these tests done. We've got to get the processes done, and we need to move on this as aggressively as we can. Furthermore, we must increase the availability of mobile medical units. That means if hospitals don't have the beds that they need, the ICU units they need, there should be units placed alongside the hospitals. And I suspect that the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration can play an important role in that process. Bottom line is that we are facing an unprecedented medical crisis. We need an unprecedented medical response. And the president has got to utilize all of the tools that he has in order to protect the American people. Second issue I want to say a few words on before we bring on the congresswomen, and that is to talk about the economic impact of the epidemic we are experiencing. Nobody, of course, can predict what the economic fallout of the epidemic is, but we all know that it is going to be very, very severe. There have been estimates out there that within a few months, unemployment in this country might be as high as 20%. There was an estimate coming from the Federal Reserve in St. Louis suggesting that by June, the unemployment rate may be even 30%. And that is on top of the reality that the stock market has suffered massive losses, which means many, many Americans are worried about what their retirement will look like with these losses. All of this suggests that what we may, and hopefully we're wrong, nobody knows, but worst case scenario, we are looking at the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And in the midst of not only this healthcare crisis, but the economic downturn, the United States Congress and the President of the United States must act in an unprecedented way, and in a way that meets the needs of the working families, the middle class, the lower income people in this country, the most vulnerable people in this country. Our job right now, and this is stuff, we have no history for doing this, but this is what we've got to do now. We've got to make everybody in this country feel confident that they will be protected as this crisis unfolds. And let me just give you an example of the kind of problems that we are dealing with. Let me just quote from an article that appeared in the Washington Post this afternoon. Quote, since Nicole Kane lost her job as a Haas's Steak and Sea House waitress Monday because of the spread of the coronavirus, all she can think about is April 1st, when her mortgage and car payments are due. Kane's husband works at Panera, which is still open for takeout in their small town of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, but business has been slow, making the couple fearful for his job as well. The family has 3 children and 2 car loans, end of quote. Suspending mortgage and car payments for 3 months would be the biggest impact for my life, Kane said, end of quote again. So here you have a family, a wife lost her job, husband may lose his job. They got a mortgage payment coming up on April 1st, and they have car payments on 2 cars. That is their reality. And what happens if they have no income? What happens? Are they going to be able to keep their house? And that's just one example. There are millions of examples. Last night, 2 nights ago, we talked to a representative of the restaurant workers organizing effort. And she was talking about millions of workers who are living on tips. They're making $2 or $3 an hour on tips, on salary, on wages, and then they get tips on top of that. These people have nothing in the bank. What happens when they lose their job? What happens to millions of people? The 40% of American people who do not have $400 in the bank for an emergency. So you got half of our country living paycheck to paycheck, and now suddenly those paychecks stop. How are they going to feed their families? How are they going to keep their telephones? How are they going to keep their lights on? What happens if their kid gets sick? How do they get to a doctor? So there is enormous economic anxiety taking place all across this country. Let me just very briefly touch upon what other countries are doing in response to the crisis. In the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Denmark, and in Norway, these countries are moving aggressively to guarantee 75, 80%, and in some cases 100% of the paychecks of workers in businesses that commit to not laying off employees. In other words, in one of those countries, if an employer says, okay, we're going to keep you on the payroll, the government is guaranteeing between 80% and 100% of that paycheck. And in my view, that is exactly what we should be doing in this country right now. Is that a radical statement? Of course it is. But these are unprecedented times. And we must spend whatever it takes to make sure that every family in America is made whole, is not made desperate by this crisis. And so it is my view that workers who are unemployed, regardless of their previous eligibility for unemployment, and that's an important point because right now, unbelievably, most workers are not covered by unemployment compensation. And we got to throw that out of the door and make sure that every worker, whether you're driving an Uber car, whether you are a waitress, whether you're a waiter, whether you're a so-called independent contractor, every worker in America needs to know that he or she is going to be able to retain their income up to at least $75,000 a year. In addition to that, we need to provide $2,000 monthly, every month, payment to every man, woman, and child in America until the crisis ends. I know some of my Republican colleagues are talking about, gee, a one-time $1,000 payment. Really? Really? Yeah, that'll last you for 2 or 3 weeks. And what happens after that? Once again, in this unprecedented moment in American history, we must act in an unprecedented way, no matter what it costs. And that means to guarantee to every man, woman, and child in this country that we will make them whole, that we're not going to leave them out hanging, losing their homes, getting evicted from their apartments, losing their ability to communicate. Furthermore, we need to make sure that every worker in America has paid family and medical leave, not just the 20% of workers who are currently have that benefit. Again, we are the only major country not to guarantee paid family and medical leave. That is beyond pathetic. And in this crisis, we have to make sure that workers do not go to work when they are sick because they are fearful of losing that paycheck. That is insane, and that is something that has to be done right now. Furthermore, we must make sure that the measures that I'm talking about apply to everyone in this country, regardless of immigration status, and they must apply equally to tribal and territorial communities as well. That means Puerto Rico, that means our other territories, that means those people who are undocumented. This is not the time to play stupid games. We are all in this together. In my view, on top of what I have just said, I worry very much about this crisis' impact on the health care benefits of ordinary Americans. Now, everybody knows that I am a strong advocate for Medicare for all. I think we got to join every other country on earth in guaranteeing health care to all people. But right now, at the very least, what we should be doing is saying to those workers, the millions of workers who are losing their jobs, you know what? Relax. You and your family are going to have health care. We're going to expand Medicare to cover you. Now, that means changes in Medicare because Medicare now does not cover the needs of children. It's not pediatric care. We have to change that. But I want every worker in America to understand that he or she and their families will be covered when they lose their jobs. And on top of that, if you have private insurance right now, you got a $5,000 deductible. We should have Medicare covering those needs so that you do not have to pay out-of-pocket expenses. Furthermore, we need to protect states and cities right now because tax revenue is plummeting. We are seeing states and cities who may not be able to make their payrolls in several weeks. And that is a disaster for the municipal and state employees, but it is also a disaster for everybody because these state and municipal workers are the people who are providing the services that we need in the midst of this crisis. So there must be a significant amount of money going to the states and the cities, and one approach is to have the Federal Reserve act aggressively and forcefully to buy short-term municipal debt securities. And this will help stabilize state government finances and provide states and cities with the financial support they need to address the health and economic crisis. Furthermore, and again, I'm only giving you an outline of some of the basics here. I mean, we can go on for hour after hour after hour dealing with all that has to be done in this crisis, which is impacting every single one of us in this country. We have got to be mindful of the most vulnerable people in this country. Right now, there are elderly people who are sitting home alone and they're worried. How are they going to get the food that they need? How are our people going to make sure that all of us have the nutrition, the housing, the clean water, the electricity, and the basic necessities of life that we all need to get through this pandemic? So that means, among many other things, expanding the Meals on Wheels program, which delivers meals to elderly people. It means expanding the school meals program. If kids are not in school now, how are they going to get the nutrition they need? We got to make sure that the kids are adequately fed in this crisis. It means expanding the SNAP program. Bottom line here, it means that in the richest country in the history of the world, in this crisis, nobody in America goes hungry. And I'm talking about the homeless, I'm talking about the disabled, I'm talking about everybody in this country. Furthermore, what it means is putting an immediate moratorium on evictions, on foreclosures, and utility shutoffs, and suspending payments on rent and mortgage loans for primary residences. It means also restoring utility services to any customers who have had their utility shut off. I think later on in this program, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Detroit is going to be talking about the insane situation in Detroit, where you got thousands and thousands of households who have no running water. Yeah, in America, all over this country, there are people who do not have running water, and we're telling everybody, wash your hands 10 times a day. We got to make sure that everybody in America has basic utility service. Furthermore, I worry very much that we have a prison system in this country, state prisons, which are already disasters. We have heard the horrible things happening. There is a fear that if we don't get our act together, we could see the coronavirus spread in those prisons. We got to make sure that we are protecting those people. And we also have to make sure that we are protecting the homeless. Last point that I want to make before I introduce our guests is that we have got to do everything we can to stop the profiteering that some corporate interests are now engaged in. There are reports that the cost of rubber gloves is now soaring because people understand there's an enormous demand for them. They can charge any price they want. My good friends in the pharmaceutical industry, which is probably the most corrupt industry to begin with, are already seeing how they can make more profits right now in the midst of this crisis. So the word has got to go out. And if Trump can't do it, and I doubt that he can, Congress must do it. and say that right now, when we have doctors and nurses, when we have police officers, when we have EMT people putting their lives on the line, when we have teachers doing everything they can to make sure that our kids continue to get the education they need, when we're seeing the best in human nature, millions of people doing the right thing in this crisis, we will not accept profiteering and greed and corporations and individuals trying to rip off people in the midst of this crisis. Not acceptable. And I don't think Trump can do the right thing on this, but Congress must do the right thing. And we must be very loud and clear on that. So let me just conclude by thanking everybody for being with us. And what we're going to do right now, because I think it's a good thing to do, but because of the technological limitations we're under here, we're going to hear some music from the artist Grandson. We thank Grandson very much for helping us out tonight. And after we hear from Grandson, we're going to come back and we're going to hear from Congresswoman. I believe the first one we're going to hear from is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Then we'll hear from ILHAN Omar from Minnesota, and then Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. I think that's the order. It may be changed, but that's what I would like to do. So let's now hear from Grandson for a few minutes, and then we'll be back with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And then after each of the members of Congress speak, we're going to open it up for a discussion. So thanks very much for being with us. Now we'll hear from Grandson.
What's going on? My name is Jordan. I make music under the name Grandson, and I am proud to endorse Senator Sanders for President of the United States. Tell me, how did we get here? And where the hell do we go now? First I was floating through the atmosphere, but now I'm looking up at rock bottom, 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 bottom. Everybody told me ever since I was young that I should bite my tongue. Couple kids, picket fence, maybe earn a nice income, and it'll get you some peace of mind. Step in line, everything will be just fine. But then I looked up, found they must have left me behind. Sent shivers down my spine. Tell me, how did we get here? And where the hell do we go now? First I was floating through the atmosphere, but now I'm looking up at rock bottom, 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 bottom. My next door neighbor said I better get a 9 to 5 just to stay alive. Talking about change, boy, that's nothing but a waste of time. Well, now I wish that I read the signs better, cause the writing was on the wall. And now we got front row seats, watch the system fall. Cause look who's in control. Tell me, how did we get here? And where the hell do we go now? First I was floating through the atmosphere, but now I'm looking up at rock bottom, 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 bottom. Dum dum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum bum bum, ba-da-dum dum, ba-da-dum dum. Cause look who's in control. Cause look who's in control. Tell me, how did we get here? And where the hell do we go now? First I was floating through the atmosphere, but now I'm looking up at rock bottom, 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 bottom. Bottom, 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 bottom
Ocasio-Cortez from the Bronx, New York. Alexandria, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Of course, Bernie. Thanks for having me, and I hope you're doing well out in Vermont. So, I mean, today, this is, what we're seeing today, and, you covered so many of these issues, is what we're seeing today with this Senate GOP bill is just a complete mockery of public service. We're supposed to be here to help people. And what Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate just presented was just a package of corporate sweeteners to hand a blank check to Trump and Mnuchin that is secret, that we won't even know who they're doling money out to. And then they're just slapping the name coronavirus on top of it. But this bill does not help working families at all. And what we really need to focus on are the core solutions. As you mentioned, going into this mess, the average American, or most Americans had about, or rather a large plurality of Americans, had less than $400 saved. About 40% of Americans had less than $400 saved for an emergency. Now, all of a sudden, the entire country is experiencing this shock at once with surging unemployment. Today, an official from the St. Louis Fed just announced that we may see up to 30% unemployment rates. At the peak of the Great Depression, we saw 24% unemployment. So this is something unlike anything that we have ever seen. So there are two main things that we need to do economically. One is that we need to get money into the hands of working people. Everyone who's, first of all, and it needs to be universal and unconditional. There are folks that want to apply a means test to make it based on how much money you made in 2018. It's as though these folks have never lived real life, as though we just repeat our salary year after year in the same way, and that every American experiences life like that. And we all know that that's just not true. Just 2 years ago, if someone was going off of my 2018 income, it would be a bartender's income. And we need to realize how much life changes every year for Americans. And so that's one thing. We need to make sure that we're getting money in to everybody immediately. But the second thing we need to do is to stop money out. And we've been able to be successful at some of this in the state of New York. As you may know, Bernie, and for everyone who's tuning in, New York right now is shaping up to be one of the epicenters of this crisis. We are the largest city in the United States, very densely populated. We share public transit and all sorts of things. And we are having thousands of cases pop up throughout the state. And I have several hospitals in my district. I have Elmhurst Hospital. I have Jacobi Medical Center. We have New York Presbyterian nearby. We have Montefiore Hospital. And these are hospitals that serve working people. They serve immigrant populations. They serve working class populations. And basically what coronavirus has done is poured gasoline on every slow rolling crisis that we have been experiencing in the United States and just set it on fire for everyone all at once. So now you have folks who are afraid to go to the hospital because of their documentation status. They're afraid to go to the hospital because they don't know how much the bill will be just for them to go and get treated. And that, of course, exacerbates the situation because people don't want to go in and get a test. They don't want to get, they're afraid of the cost of this treatment if they're uninsured or underinsured. Now you have the entire whole blown through the argument as to why employment should be the reason why you have healthcare or not, or rather why your healthcare status should be conditional based on your employment. And not just whether you have insurance or not, but the quality of care that you get or not, being dependent on your employer. It's wrong. We have long been talking about how healthcare should be treated as a human right in the United States, why we need Medicare for all. And this is one huge case study as to why this is so important. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of people, that we're getting money in, and again, that we're also halting money out. That means mortgage, rent, and debt payments should all be suspended until people can get their feet under them. And we need to make sure that that people aren't continuing to get fleeced or being targeted by predatory lenders as well. And so, right now, because Trump has essentially abdicated leadership of this country to each individual governor, we're currently in this situation where governors are competing for resources, but also that these solutions are kind of chipping away state by state. So what we've been able to accomplish in the state of New York is secure a mortgage moratorium and an eviction and foreclosure moratorium. That's well and good. But if you're going to pass a mortgage moratorium without also passing a rent moratorium, what you are doing is that you are providing relief to people, largely, at least in the city of New York, based on their class, and that you're providing higher relief to people who are landowners or landlords. And so one thing that I'm currently pushing is that I've been calling up Albany and making sure that we push a rent moratorium before April 1st, before the first of the month when everyone's rent checks are due. We're in active conversations about that. I'm hoping that we're able to get this done in the next week because it's going to be extraordinarily important. Student loan debt is another massive another massive amount of money that goes out to people that we also need to halt. And that is something that is totally within our power, within the federal government. As most people know, we advocate for cancellation of student loan debt. But even just pressing the pause button is something that you could snap your fingers and do tomorrow if there was political will and if we had a White House that cared about working people. So that is something that we have to make sure that we put the political pressure on. But again, all of these, the reason we are here and the reason this crisis is hitting us so hard is because we have one of the worst healthcare systems in the developed world. We pay less than a living wage to a shamefully large amount of workers in the United States. Paid sick leave is not guaranteed. And we have to make sure that people have basic rights and as well as labor rights. So all of these things are contributing factors as to why this is hitting us so hard. But then you take that economic piece and you layer on inequities of race and immigration status, and you see that how things can get even worse. I represent New York's 14th congressional district, which covers the Bronx and Queens, and it includes Rikers Island. Now, we have been pushing for criminal justice reforms for a very long time and decarceral policy. And one thing that we need to do right now is really hit fast forward on progressive developments and pursuing decarceral policy because people's lives are at risk. There are people in jails right now in situations that are completely destitute and wrong. Right now, there are so many people crammed into certain cells in Rikers, and 21 incarcerated individuals have already tested positive for COVID-19. Those are folks who have been able to get tested. And as we know, tests are very limited. They are rationed for people who are already exhibiting quite extreme symptoms. So we have no idea how much this outbreak is going out. So there are a lot of things that we're asking for. One, we need to provide elderly clemency. There are plenty of people on Rikers that have been 60, 70, 80, 90 years old who quite literally need someone to take care of them, and they are still kept in a cage in Rikers Island and in prisons throughout the United States. We need to ensure that we are granting elderly clemency in the United States. We need to stop unnecessary pretrial detention in the United States. We need to stop arrests for low-level offenses, and quite a few areas have started rolling out some of these reforms. And it's actually a fascinating progressive moment, because what it's shown is that all of these issues have never been about how are you going to pay for it. It's never been about whether we have the capacity to do these things or if the logistics have worked out. All of these excuses that we have been given as to why we cannot treat people humanely have suddenly gone up in smoke. And what has been revealed is that all of these issues were really about a lack of political will and who you deemed worthy to be in an emergency or not. Because to me, in New York City, the highest rates of homelessness since the Great Depression has been an emergency for a very long time. And we have had to have been pushing for housing as a human right for a very long time. Now that we are experiencing everybody who's threatened by the uncertainty of this moment, everyone's realizing, wait, we are all in this together. And that so that applies not just to issues of economic prosperity, but it also applies to issues of criminal justice, of civil rights, of human rights. And on the last note, one of the things that I also represent is LaGuardia Airport. And about a week ago, I was called by a community organization, New Sanctuary Coalition, and there was an anonymous tip that there were 6 young children being transported by ICE into New York City in the middle of a coronavirus outbreak. And I had gotten this call on a late Saturday night, and I was asked, can you go to LaGuardia right now? So we hop in, I rush to LaGuardia Airport, and I just took all of my congressional credentials with me, and I just waited outside of the gate where families come out of the airport. And I waited there until I saw an ICE agent with about 6 young children with him. And that's when we started to realize that meanwhile, while the Pentagon has paused all domestic travel for the military, while everyone is working from home, while we were then on the brink of instituting a shelter-in-place policy, you still have ICE that's trafficking children across the country. And not only that, but there are immigrants in detention centers that are getting even less attention because the federal government argues that they are entitled to less human rights than the rest of us. And so as a consequence, there are ICE detainees that are on hunger strikes in New Jersey in several different facilities. You have folks in Rikers who are also starting to organize their own strikes, and that they are not leaving their facilities. They are not going to their labor assignments, which we shouldn't even have mandatory labor assignments where prisoners are paid slave wages. So, we see how all of these issues, social, racial, and economic, are coming to a head, and we can move through this. And if we handle this right, if we handle this with bold, moral leadership, we can move through this and make sure that we abolish these systems of injustice, abolish these systems of class warfare, basically, and we can move to a system that centers people and working class Americans. And, with that, I'm just going to hand it off because that's just our report from New York, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other issues that are being experienced in Minnesota and Michigan as well.
Alexandria, thank you so much. Let's go to ILHAN Omar, who represents the Minneapolis.
And we can move to a system that centers people.
ILHAN represents the Minneapolis area in Minnesota. ILHAN, are you there?
Hello,
Okay.
Bernie. How are you?
I'm good, ILHAN. How are you?
I'm doing good. I was just listening to Alexandria speak so passionately, really about what is happening with our immigration system and how in this particular time we're really failing to show up humanely for vulnerable people. As you know, I led an effort to try to get the Homeland Security Department to halt all deportation, to try to make sure that their facilities are doing everything that they can to prevent the spread of the virus, and making sure that we have an opportunity for people really not to spread the coronavirus. Many of the issues that we've been working on have been really, truly been discussed by you and Alexandria. There are a few things I wanted to highlight. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation today. It's really important, I think, as we look at, how we got here and what makes our country in this particular time so vulnerable really is because we have neglected so many critical issues, and we haven't addressed them for many years. The lack of income inequality that exists in this country is now being exacerbated through this crisis. In Minnesota, I think just in a couple of days there was about 100,000 people who applied for unemployment insurance. They were saying just in a few days, unemployment went from 3% to 6%. So it makes sense that the kind of estimates that are being made about it going up to 30% at some point really could happen, because we know that there are so many people currently that are going to be unemployed and underemployed because of this. We also know that there are so many Americans who are shackled with student debt. So my sister Ayanna Presley out of Massachusetts and I led a letter to try to make sure that this next package includes a cancellation of student debt, because we certainly don't want people making a decision about whether they should feed their families, feed themselves, and make a decision about making a payment for their student debt. It's really important that in this particular time, when we are thinking about a next phase of relief, as you said, we have to make sure that we are not evicting people, that there is support for people who are paying rent, and it's not, as Alexandria said, about class, and not just only worrying about people who have a mortgage or people who have car payments that they have to make. But we have people, as probably Rashida will talk about, who are faced with their utilities being cut off. So we want to make sure that there's a protection against that. My state is doing lots of work in trying to guarantee that for people. We introduced a couple of bills. One that will guarantee a universal emergency payout of $1,000 to each adult, and $500 to every single child. We wanted to make sure for that to have the kind of impact we want it to have, for it not to be tied to any sort of income that you have or be means tested. Try to make sure that every single person in this country is able to get that relief and get it now. So we're asking the Treasury and the Social Security Department, the IRS and Social Security Department through the Treasury to be able to process that. We also are hearing from a lot of our small businesses here in Minnesota who are struggling right now. I recently spoke to a small banquet hall that essentially makes most of their money from weddings. They are committed to trying to still pay their employees, but they're not going to be able to have any income coming in. And so we introduced the Apple Act, which is a business relief bailout, so that they can have the opportunity to be able to do everything that they can do now, and have the government to make sure that they are being reimbursed for their lost wages. I think in this time we have to, one, come together and realize that there are so many people across the country, whether they are people who are working at our stores, at our grocery stores, whether it is the people at our hospitals and clinics, whether it is the people at the police departments or firefighters, any of our frontline workers, people who are working in remotely from our offices, every single person who is doing work around the clock to try to make sure that Americans have the proper information that they need, that they're keeping themselves safe and informed, is receiving the kind of gratitude that they deserve, because without them, I don't think we will have the opportunity to really care for our constituents. As we go back and have a conversation with leadership, I think it's going to be really important for us to stay firm in making sure that there is no prioritizing of bailout to corporations, but bailout for workers, bailout for those who are most vulnerable in our communities, trying to make sure that there is an expansion of healthcare, an expansion of unemployment insurance, an expansion of paid sick leave, and an expansion of protection for many of our vulnerable communities, making sure that we have a plan in place for those who are homeless and those who are vulnerable out in our communities, and making sure that this administration is being truly held accountable for any sort of missed opportunity in trying to curb the spread of this virus, and giving out the proper information for the country to truly have the kind of preparedness that would have really stopped the kind of crisis that we have right now. I recently talked to healthcare providers in my state, and we're learning that they are operating with 2 weeks in 2 weeks behind. So any of the numbers we're learning about, those are the testing positive in our communities, any of the shortage of supplies, all of those things are really not true actual numbers. And so we know that this crisis is fully not even understood, the kind of toll it will have economically on our communities. And so making sure that any policies that we propose, any kind of advocacy work that we do is rooted in the fact that this is going to be a lot worse than what we know. It's important for us not to panic, but it's also important for us to be honest with the American people and make sure that we are working together to move forward and make proposals that are going to be just and take care of everyone. Lastly, I want to say that there are some creative ways that communities are showing up for one another. I know that many people in my district are showing up for people in nursing homes who are isolated right now by doing video chats and volunteering their time to stay connected with people. I know that many in my community are changing the little neighborhood libraries that they have into food shelves and putting extra food in there for people to access. I know your campaign has done a lot of work in trying to raise money so that communities have support that they need. Our campaign is utilizing its resources to do community check-ins and wellness check-ins with people. So I know in this particular time, we can all be very creative, use the resources that we have, and use them in a way that is going to create a positive impact on everyone around us. And as lawmakers, we have a responsibility to put people first and make sure that we continue to fight for people who are vulnerable in our communities. Thank you.
Ilhan, thanks very much for what you're doing and for your being with us this evening. Our last but certainly not least is Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, who represents the Detroit area. Rashida, you there?
We can hear now.
Hi.
Yay. We can
Hi,
hear
Bernie. Oh, my son wants to say hi.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm homeschooling, Bernie. I'm homeschooling. So everybody quiet, please. I'm on the thing. Okay, so I'm really glad that we're doing this because I think it's really important that folks need to know and have a human face of what's actually happening on the ground, because I think the disconnect sometimes in Congress and DC is so real. As somebody that worked at nonprofit organizations, always trying to go to Lansing and all those different local governments, telling people, you know, we're in survivor mode already before the coronavirus. And you know this, Senator, and I know my great, amazing colleagues. I miss them so much. I miss you, Alex, Ilhan.
Miss you too.
Thank you. And so I already saw statistics where unemployment has gone up. I think we're at 108,000 unemployment applications in Michigan. I think during the Great Recession recent, it was like 77,000. So it's up 2,100%. Most of our neighbors, again, are already in survivor mode. So most of our folks already have lack of access to healthcare, to fair wage and all of those things. So I am talking to many folks that understand that. So we must be aggressive, as you all know, and very creative and inclusive. I think it's so important that we're as inclusive as possible. I feel like when we're picking winners and losers and picking those folks that, if it's like Alex said, the means test or anything like that, we really are making a disservice to the whole country. So the government response must be centered around people. And now let's kind of talk about what that would look like. As folks know, I dropped a proposal called Automatic Boost to Communities Act, which some people are calling Mint the Coin. And this is really important because it would really instantly lift people out of the situation they're in instantly with $2,000 and then $1,000 every month for a year. You know what? One thing that I know, and for organizers and folks listening, know this: do not settle for one-time payments. Do not settle for one-time kind of approaches, but we need to understand that this is going to be a whole year of impact and effect on people. And again, it's your job and your time, and as well as all of us in Congress, to try to put a human face to that. And one of the things that we know now is we have 3,000 water shutoffs now in Detroit. And I can tell you, even though they said they're going to put a moratorium and everything, they only put about 200 to 300 people's water back on. What that means is not only can people wash their hands, but people today were volunteers, barrels of water to take to people's homes that have children. Some are so afraid to come forward because they know if they tell people they don't have water, that their children could be taken away tomorrow. This is the reality of survivor mode and why it's so important that we have no strings attached to any kind of approach that we have in trying to lift people out of poverty. It is so critically important that when we talk about small businesses, that we also talk about local governments. They're employers too. Many of them, these are those that touch the lives of our people a lot more than the federal government does. These are our townships. These are our folks that are first responders that need PPE and masks and are begging for water as well, not because they have water shortage, but because they need these things to be able to serve our folks. Because when they call 911, somebody has to respond. And Senator Sanders knows that because he's a former mayor, and you understand that we have to have some sort of approach for our local government. So bill tomorrow, I hope people will support, is basically expanding the Federal Reserve Bank, which they already have authority now, I truly believe that, to immediately purchase any municipal debt. They do it for banks all the time. So the Federal Reserve Bank needs to wake up. Chairman Powell needs to understand they are critical to our local economy. They, again, do it all the time for corporations, other folks. Again, these are our first responders, our folks on the ground that really need to be lifted up. I have been truly inspired by all the people. You should see, Bernie, people are delivering groceries to their neighbors. Not only today did the People Water Board and all these water justice advocates today delivering water to people's homes, but they're also literally visiting, talking to folks, again, in the guidelines of social distancing, but really checking up on each other, and has been truly inspiring to see that. The economic divide in our country is so real, and we're feeling it now, but with me representing the third poorest congressional district, we've already been living it. And corporate greed has showed its ugly face again as we try to help our communities during this national, pandemic that's happening. So we need to really organize and elevate these stories again, these human stories of what it means to choose corporations over people. Tomorrow, much of my campaign, my team is going to be shifting a lot of efforts to raise money for Rock, Michigan, which is Restaurant Opportunity Center of Michigan. My restaurant small business community, you have to know, immediately was shattered. Doors had to close down. These are my neighbors and service workers that desperately need help. So we're shifting a lot of that, and we're, again, using creative means of not just relying, obviously making sure government works for people, but also shifting even our own resources and showing others, this is how you have to do it. This is, again, a time in our country that's pretty remarkable and very painful if we do nothing to really push people out. So let's really bail out people first. Let's center around people. Our country cannot exist without these folks that are working in our grocery stores, our local firefighters, our community folks. I mean, our healthcare workers are absolutely on the front lines, but a lot of the other folks are so integrated and connected to that. I had a nurse tell me she got off in a long shift and she couldn't find anything to eat after helping people during this crisis. Again, all of it is so interconnected to each other. So we need to really be able to, again, be creative, aggressive, and inclusive during this effort. And I can't thank you all enough. I've been sitting here trying to triage. And I know Alex, ILHAN, and Senator Sanders knows this. You get these calls and you're triaging, almost like an ER. Who's going to go get the groceries? Who's going to get the person water? How can I get diapers, Bernie? I had to get diapers for one of my foster care agencies in Inkster, who couldn't get diapers for infants from infant to 4 years old. This is what's happening. Again, if you want to see, and I say this to everybody, you want to see what doing nothing looks like, you come to my district and I will show you specifically what the human impact is. But now everybody is sensing it. Everybody is seeing the economic divide and what it really is resulting in, what its face looks like. And so again, as we mint the coin proposals, talk about local government assistance, really, really uplifting what Alex is doing, and ILHAN, and even my sister Ayanna Presley is on the forefront and pushing back at what's happening with folks in our Bureau of Prisons all across the country. We really need all of you out there to not stop beating the drum. You are an extension of who we are as members of Congress. You all give us credibility. When we're screaming and saying, this is not enough, Mitch McConnell, you all are in the background saying, yes, let me tell you why this is not going to work. And so it is critically important, as folks are listening in, that you are so much part of what we're doing and so much, so connected in what we're doing. And I want to thank you, Senator Sanders, for asking me to be part of this. And sharing what my team and I have been working really hard on, and sharing again what frontline communities like mine and 13 District Strong is experiencing right now during this national epidemic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Rashida, and thank you, ILHAN, and thank you, Alexandria. I don't, frankly, don't know where to begin. There's so much to discuss. Let me just start off with something that Rashida said, and ILHAN and Alexandria touched on it as well. What can, in the midst of this crisis, before we talk about government policy, what can ordinary people do to help their neighbors right now? What are some of the things you guys are doing? What are you seeing other people doing? At this moment, what is extraordinary, at the same time as we see this ugly corporate greed, we see the best in people, putting their lives on the line, literally, to help other people. Why don't we start off, Alexandria? What are you seeing in your community? What are people doing?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you asked this point and you asked this question, Bernie, because there are things that we can do to make our lives better immediately. This past week, my campaign hosted an organizing call on how to set up a mutual aid network in your neighborhood. And, in our city, it could be your building floor. It could be your block. It could just be your street. And what we did was that we held, we brought thousands of people onto a call, and we trained people in how to set up a mutual aid network. And what that really means is how you set up a network between your neighbors in meeting and helping each other meet their needs. And all of us have needs, whether they're material, whether they're time-based, whether they're labor-based. And so right now, if you live in a building or if you live, on a block, you can make a little sign and say, I'm here to help you out. And you can say what that help is. Or you can say, hey, I need some help. And and that helps us, process and really come to each other's aid without trying to just wait on Mitch McConnell to do the right thing. And so some ways that you can help each other, things that you can provide, you can offer childcare to a trusted neighbor. If your neighbor trusts you, if they have to work from home, you can offer childcare. You can knock on an elderly neighbor's door, talk to them through the door so you don't have to open the door, and ask if you can go get their groceries for them. And make sure that you don't have to expose them to unnecessary risk. So next time you go to the store, ask someone if you can get anything for them, or if they can just give you they could just give you their grocery list and their payment. You can also just check up on people, see how they're doing, see if they're okay. And for a lot of people, our society and the way our society is organized creates an immense amount of isolation. And that is only going to exacerbate in the months to come. So making sure that we are finding ways to socially connect with one another, even if we cannot be physically present, is all incredibly important. And so, for anyone that's interested, you can go to my website, ocasio-cortez.com. I'm sure it'll be on our past events. The legendary organizer, Miriam Kaba, organized and helped lead us through not just how you conduct mutual aid, but the important political history of mutual aid that spans all across the United States and our history. And so that's something that I would say is an extremely important way that we can organize and make each other's lives better immediately.
Good. Thank you, Alexandria. Ilhan, did you want to add something to that?
There were a couple of things I mentioned earlier. I think turning the neighborhood libraries into a temporary mini food shelf is a great idea. Many of us have perishable foods that we might not be using ourselves, or might have the resources to get some extra stuff. And so putting that out for people in your neighborhood who might not want to come and ask, or might not have the ability to go to the local food shelf or wait in line, can utilize. I think another really creative way to show up for our community is something I think that Alex mentioned a little, is helping babysit for one another. There are frontline workers, people who are working in our grocery stores. They're taking extra shifts because the need is higher. People who are working at hospitals, whether it is a nurse or a doctor, every single person that's making our hospitals and clinics run, they're putting in extra time. And so if you are able, signing up for a shift to help care for anyone that you know's children, that's helpful in this particular time. I was completely moved in seeing some of the young people in my district really engage with elders through live chat and having that ability, because we know many of our elders in a home care setting are used to getting visitors. They're used to having interactions with people. They're already mostly isolated. Some of them might not have family. And so having someone communicate with them a few hours a day is really helpful way for us to continue to get through this isolation together. It's also really good for people's mental health, for young people who are used to socializing and going out. Connecting with an elderly person who desperately needs that interaction is really important. We can do that with our veterans in the VA and find creative ways to set that up. And so I think, in this particular time, it's really going to be important for us to show up for one another. Campaigns, I ask many of our colleagues who have functioning campaigns, who are running for re-election, to utilize some of their resources in asking their campaign staff and campaign volunteers to do community check-ins, to call their constituents and the people that they serve, not just wait for the phone calls, but to also call themselves and see how things are going. We're starting with elders in our district, but you can start wherever you want. And I think for people out there that are thinking about ways that they can help, they can sign up to volunteer to make phone calls and utilize your dialer as you engage people in raising money for important causes, or they can sign up to volunteer with our campaigns and make sure that they are helping do some of those community check-ins and have conversations with people right now. And I know so many people are worried watching the TV and hearing the constant updates will do something to your psyche. So having a conversation with someone is really going to be important. And so I hope that people use this time to take a break from their screens and find an opportunity to chat with someone out there and engage them in a conversation that is just about being hopeful this tomorrow, that we will ultimately get past it and we will do it together.
Ilhan, thanks so much. Rashida, do you want to add a few words?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think it's really important to, just in some sort of way, show up for others when you can. And we've done it in different ways. I know my neighborhood where I grew up, born and raised in Detroit, we're pretty resilient. But every corner of my district has been doing some creative things like having their kids, there's like a list of all the senior living places around the district, and they're having the kids write to various folks at the places to be able to engage. And hi, honey. And one of the things that I also love is a lot of my local mayors and township supervisor have put a list together of small businesses that are still doing carry out, delivery, things like that to kind of support them as well. Other thing I really love, I love this. One neighborhood in Southwest Detroit chose a time, I think it was like 5 o'clock. Everybody at that time said, go out on their porches and just wave to each other. I actually broke down in tears because it was just so beautiful to watch. People got up on their porch and they probably would have never done something like that if not for the national, epidemic.
Rashida, you have to acknowledge you cry all the time anyhow, right?
But it was so beautiful, Senator. And it was so beautiful because there was this sense of love and just, people are really, their compassion is coming out, and just watching them all just wave to each other like that was super incredible. Those are the kinds of things I think give our country hope. We are resilient, we're strong, we're loving, all of those things that sometimes doesn't seem to shine with the current administration, doesn't shine with certain decisions being made in DC that again is so incredibly disconnected with what's happening in our communities.
Well, now you all know why these three young members of Congress have helped transform this country. And I'm glad everybody has a chance to get a glimpse of them, as I have for the last many, many months. They are so great, so human, so smart, so courageous, that it has just been a pleasure for me to have worked with them. And they continue to do a great, great job. So let me thank Alexandria and Ilhan and Rashida for being with me tonight. Let me thank all of you out there. I think it was a great discussion. I think you heard some great ideas. People now are nervous, they're isolated, and anything that we can do at the grassroots level to make people know that they're not alone in this crisis is a huge step forward. So members of Congress, thank you. American people, thank you. We'll see you soon. Thank you all.
Bye. Bye, thank you.
Having toured now across America and across the world and connected with thousands of people of all different ages and all different orientations, I've really begun to understand just how common our story is and our struggles are. So many of us are going through the same uncertainty with what we're going to do when we're older, with how we're going to afford the medication that we need, how we're going to take on climate change. And I think that understanding that any problem that one of us is facing is a problem for all of us is the only way we're going to tackle these huge generational problems that we're up against. So I think that "Not Me, Us" slogan, it can be applied in so many ways, but first and foremost, it's just that any one of us going through anything is all of our collective responsibility. I'm gonna do one more song, and it couldn't be more relevant to what we're going through today and why we need Bernie Sanders in office. This is a song called "Blood Water."
We'll never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed, your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? Look me in my eyes, tell me everything's not fine, or the people ain't happy, and the river has run dry. You thought you could go free, but the system is done for. If you listen real closely, there's a knock at your front door. We'll never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed, your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? When there's blood in the oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the water. What you gonna do? Beg me for mercy, admit you were toxic. You poisoned me just for another dollar in your pocket. Now I am the violence, I am the sickness. Won't accept your silence, beg me for forgiveness. We'll never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed is your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? Oh, when there's blood in the oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the water. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? Blood in the water. It goes, I am the people, I am the storm, I am the riot, I am the swarm. When the last tree's falling, the animal can't hide, money won't solve it. What's your alibi? What's your alibi? What's your alibi? What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? Oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the oh, 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 blood in the water. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water?